big question people have? Like, what's the thing everybody's wondering about? What's the thing I don't understand? What would I want to hear?
It's like, that's Big's Darklighter's home. So how did you know? Because I'm a nerd.
Cassie and Jim on the beach, and people are like, no. I can literally hear people that go, no.
Because Darth Vader was the scariest thing that had ever happened to anybody, and this guy literally looks like the devil.
What are you doing, C-3PO? I'm taking one last look at my friends. These aren't your friends.
And I get a later call that said, yeah, you probably want to use Wedge Antilles.
That spirit of doing everything they can to tell the story they want to tell, I think really comes through on Star Wars.
You don't do that. There is no try.
I joke that the best thing about writing Princess Leia is everybody knows who she is, and the worst thing about writing Princess Leia is everyone knows who she is.
It doesn't look like they're even hungry when they get out. They're not just like, did you bring a Snickers or something?
I'm honored to be here. I'm also impressed that you got Zach Galifianakis as a guest tonight.
That's so funny.
I've always been kind of a closet Star Wars fan up until, maybe 15, 20 years ago.
I'm just sort of a fan hoping to bring other fans along. That's all I'm doing.
The galaxy isn't growing to push people out. It's growing to let more people come in and find their love so that it's able to continue and create this connective tissue that grows forever.
Where now I feel like I can't do that because somebody's going to turn it into a blog post and then it's going to become a whole thing.
I have had the best time ever on Around the Galaxy.
Be coming back to a show that I dearly love and admire, so thanks for having me.
Well, welcome to Around the Galaxy, the Star Wars fan talk show. I'm your host, Pete Fletcher. Thank you so much for hanging out with us tonight. It's been a couple weeks. We haven't recorded a new episode probably in about 4 or 5 weeks before a Star Wars Celebration, and so we've been a little bit quiet. But if you're a patron and you're hanging out with us tonight, thank you so much. We really appreciate it. We really appreciate you being a part of the family. And tonight we have a real special treat for you tonight. We are speaking to a woman named Swapna Krishna. Now, if you have a kid who's anywhere between 8 and 12, maybe 14, maybe even a little older, she's doing an amazing science show that you've probably seen, a PBS-based show called Far Out. But she's also written for StarTrek.com and StarWars.com and Wired. And the list, honestly, it just goes and goes. And she's been on panels and she writes for SYFY and Wired. So I am so excited to just have a great Star Wars conversation with her and bring that to you this evening. So without further ado, let me bring in Swapna Krishna.
Hello.
Swapna, how are you?
I'm good. How are you doing?
I am so good. I am so happy you're here with us tonight, and just excited to get to know your Star Wars story. Because wow, as we were saying before we got on, I started doing some digging. I was like, when do you sleep? I mean, really? So for people who don't know you, maybe give us the quick intro.
Yeah, so it is really hard, I will be honest, sometimes to define what I do, because I feel like sometimes I do a little bit of everything, but the best definition I've come up with is I'm a space science and tech journalist that writes kind of the intersection of kind of science and pop culture. So I do a lot of science stuff, I do a lot of space stuff, a lot of tech, but also a ton of pop culture stuff. And so I try to operate kind of the intersection of those things. And so, yeah, my biggest project, as you mentioned, is Far Out, a YouTube show from PBS, and it's about the next 50 years in science and tech. And I'm very excited about it.
It's a really cool show. And I was so happy that my daughter is kind of a science nerd. So it really works out well for me because I have an excuse to watch all those shows. I mean, she really enjoys those kind of things. And honestly, one of the great things about the way the show is done is, and a lot of PBS stuff is, it's made for children, but as an adult, I'm like, bring it in, give it all to me.
Yep. And that's the goal. It's kind of, we're trying to make it something for all ages. So yeah.
It's such a fun show. But you in your introduction there, you made a really interesting comment that has sort of, I think it's it's kind of where we are now. Is pop culture is, I guess the definition of pop culture is it's everywhere anyway. But I really feel like pop culture has become almost much more mainstream, right? I think about back, I was a kid in the 70s and 80s, and if you were a Star Wars kid like I was, it wasn't like I wasn't wearing a Star Wars shirt everywhere I went. Oh, that's a lie. I kind of was, but but it wasn't the cool thing, right? But now between Marvel and Star Wars and Star Trek, pop culture is everywhere. Have you noticed that as well? And how has it changed for you over the time?
Oh yeah, so geek culture is I feel like the mainstream, whereas when I was growing up that wasn't the case. And I think it's really cool. I think it's exciting, but I think it's sometimes a little odd as a person who grew up and went to my first Star Trek convention in secret because I didn't want anybody like at my school knowing.
Right.
Like when I think it's really cool. And as a person who tries to talk a lot about science, and especially like one of my passions is kind of talking about STEM for kids, using the avenue of, Star Trek, Star Wars, of these geek properties is such a gift to be able to talk about, these kinds of things and get them really excited about STEM versus, when we were growing up, Greek culture was not as prevalent. So this stuff wasn't as mainstream. It wasn't as talked about. And I think a lot of us were inspired by it nonetheless, but I think it has a much bigger reach now.
Yeah, and it does make it easier, I guess, to sometimes have those conversations because you can reference those as well. So how did you discover Star Wars, and let's broaden that in your entire sort of your entree into science fiction and sort of geek culture?
So I had an older sibling, and for Star Wars, I actually don't remember the first time I saw it. It's just one of those things I've always seen. And so I don't remember the first, I don't have a memory of watching it for the first time. It's just, It's always kind of been in the fabric of what I've loved. Star Trek, I was a little bit older, and my sister was into it, so then I got into it. But yeah, it was very much just part of growing up for me. It wasn't like, there was all this like this kind of geek stuff and everything else. That was just how I grew up.
Yeah. And so geez, was it your Star Trek entree? Was it Next Generation? Was it Deep Space Nine?
Then Next Gen. I grew up on Next Gen. Deep Space Nine is my favorite, like so many people, but I grew up, I started watching Star Trek. The first Star Trek movie I watched was Undiscovered Country, which is Star Trek 6. It was 91. Star Trek Next Gen was what I grew up on.
Yeah. And I love the fact that, and maybe I've been lucky because I grew up, my father was a Star Trek fan and he got me into horror movies and sci-fi. I watched all the old classics, but I never saw sort of that, what is it, sort of the head-to-head competition between Star Trek and Star Wars. I never saw it. I always felt like they can live together in the
growing up, I only learned it was a thing when I used to, like, way too young, get on the internet forums on like Prodigy and AOL and like way too young and like look at this, and then that's when I learned like it was a Star Trek versus Star Wars things, and these weren't just both things everybody loved equally.
Right. Now, what do you think it is about Star Wars and Star Trek that, I mean, I have to admit, I get up early to watch Kenobi every week now, but I'm also getting up early on Thursdays to watch Strange New Worlds for Star Trek. Why do you think these franchises now over Star Trek is what, 55 years old, plus or minus, right? And Star Wars is 45. Why do you think they still survive and have as passionate a fan base, if not more so now than they did in the past?
I mean, I think it's a really good question. I think for Star Wars, I think they're both similar. I think it's because they're both become generational properties. So it's a thing, the parents are into it. I've definitely watched a few Next Generation episodes with my toddler. He is obsessed with Grogu, obsessed. And like, it's actually just super interesting having a toddler and having him see like Yoda all over the house and be like, oh, that's Grogu. Like, it's because like that is his first introduction to this species of, whatever, we don't know what they're called, but it's his first introduction.
Right.
And so that blows my mind. But I think it's a little bit of that, like passing down the thing you love to your kid. I think there's a lot of that involved in both of them. But I think if you step back from it, they're both timeless stories about, just in the end, it's about wanting to be better. Wanting to be better people, wanting to do better than the people who came before us. And I think that's powerful in any way, but setting it kind of in these sci-fi franchises and these universes makes it so that like we can keep revisiting it in different ways because they're both so big at this point.
Right. And I would agree. And I think what's interesting too is somehow the technology is still timeless, even though, I mean, we watched Star Trek original series and we kind of laugh a little bit, but they were like, they predicted things that we have now, right? And they have, and so there's kind of that piece in Star Wars, of course, by positioning itself a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. Technology didn't matter. We just sort of whatever they need, they have, and that's kind of interesting. But when how did that sort of sci-fi fantasy world influence you to go on to do all these things that you do today?
Oh, like whenever anybody asks, like, why did you become, a science and tech writer? And it's because of Star Trek, like specifically, like the link is very direct. I got very interested in, science and technology as a kid, and I wanted to be an astronaut. And then, kind of figured out that the best way for me to do that was to communicate it rather. I decided, I didn't go to school for science. I don't have a formal education in like science or tech, but I do have a very strong writing background. And so, I went to actually a couple of launches for NASA to see them in person. NASA has a great program called NASA Social that I highly recommend for anybody who's a fan of NASA who has a social media account. It's not, you don't have to have like 1 million followers. You can have like 50 followers, but as long as you're passionate about what you do and what you communicate, it is a program where they invite social media users to like do really cool stuff behind the scenes. So like I got to go watch the second to last space shuttle launch in 2011 from the press site and like got all these behind the scenes like stuff. And like, it was that experience. I had been a writer, but not in science and technology. And it was like kind of that experience. And then being like, I also met LeVar Burton, which, that didn't hurt, but like, I met him there, but, of course he has been like such a like force in my life from between, Star Trek and Reading Rainbow.
Reading Rainbows. I always think Reading Rainbow first. It's so funny.
Right?
Even though
I feel like he has had such an outsized influence on my life. And so like meeting him there, seeing this launch, and I was like, I want to communicate. I want to do more of this work. I want to, go into science and technology communication and, journalism and talk about this stuff. And so, I just really like gritted my teeth and like worked my way up in order to be able to do it.
That's great. That's really, that's and I think that's an important thing too, is I always tell people, find what you love to do, because you're going to spend more time doing that than anything else, right? Don't just, it's funny. My daughter, of all things, she's come up now twice in this conversation, but she said, I want to do this when I grow up because I want to make money. I was like, you know what? Find what you love doing, and then you'll make the money. And so even with, you wanted to be an astronaut, but you found your avenue was something that you became a little bit more passionate about. And I think that's so critical.
Yeah.
So tell me a little bit more about the Far Out show and where you're taking that and what was sort of the basis of it.
So it is a show basically examining the next 50-ish years. I say 50 years is kind of a catchphrase, but it's the next few decades in science and technology, where we're going, and kind of not necessarily answering. I was about to say answering the biggest questions, but that's not actually accurate, because we're not trying to answer questions. A lot of these questions are too big to have answers.
Mm.
But what we're trying to do instead is just, ask a big question and present the facts of where experts think we're going, without moralizing, without telling people what to think, and just like, here's what we know and here's what we think might happen. And, that's what the future holds. And so, and it's a very stylized show. So there's a lot of really cool animation, a lot of bright colors, which I'm very excited about. I love the look of it. And so we're every 3 weeks on Thursdays on PBS Terra, TERRA, their YouTube channel. And I'm really excited about it. We've got a 24 episode first season mapped out. And so, I'm hoping we'll do plenty of traditional STEM content, but we're also going to do some less traditional, STEM stuff. So, and it is an all ages show. So I think for the most part, it is very appropriate for kids, but, anybody can watch, and I hope learn something and enjoy it.
Yeah. I was watching the aging episode just this afternoon, which is, just wild. Like, I think, and it's funny because as I'm having this conversation, I'm realizing that we're not digging as deep into Star Wars, but we'll get there in a second. But I find it interesting from a science and perspective and I'd love to get your thoughts on this mindset. Is we are in almost a point where, I don't want to say we know everything we will know, right? But we have a very deep understanding of the world around us. The skill sets for the next generation may be more important to be able to take that information and do something with it rather than being the first to find it. What are your thoughts on a thought like that?
Oh yeah, I think we'll never run out of things to discover. I mean, I think the world is big, space is big. I think we'll always have things to discover, but yeah, I agree. I think we're getting to a point where being first I don't think, of course being first is great, but I think it's more like what you do with the knowledge and how you apply it, how you use it, where you go with it. And I absolutely think that's accurate. Discoveries are important, but it's going to be even more important how we apply them and how we use them and what we learn, I think.
Yeah, that's cool. So let's talk a little bit about what's happening with Star Wars. Let's put on your fan hat for a minute.
Yes.
And let's take, I just listened to your Kenobi episode today.
I love it. Oh my God, that show, it breaks my heart.
It's so amazingly well done. Now, the first question I have for you though is, were you at Star Wars Celebration?
I was not, and I will say I'm really sad I was not. It looked like I've been to a celebration before. I went 4 years ago, maybe, when it was in Orlando. So I have experienced it, but it was not in the cards for me to go with my I travel to film my show, so it's that my travel schedule has been a little bit intense lately, so it was not in the cards to go, but I'm really sad about it. It looked like such a good time.
It was my first celebration, and I went with my son and my 75-year-old father, so it was a generational thing. It was very cool. So the Kenobi show, well, first of all, let's take a step back. Of the Disney properties that have come out so far, where do you fall on that? Perhaps let's start with that style of storytelling, because it's very different than waiting for the next movie. Star Wars as a serialized way of telling the story. How's that impacted you as a fan?
So I love it. I will say, I mean, and of course, I'm also a person where more Star Wars is better. So of course, I do love it, but I do feel like I like Star Wars to be a thing where I don't have to engage with every single piece of the expanded universe in order to understand what's going on the screen, especially in the movies, because the movies do attract people who are, to be fair, I do engage with most pieces of the expanded universe, personally, but I really hate talking to friends who've only seen, let's say, a couple of movies and are like, I didn't understand X, and I'm like, oh yeah, that's explained in the Darth Vader comic run by Greg Pak or something, you know what I mean?
Right.
I do appreciate, so I actually really like the shift to TV storytelling because you can just do more and tell more story. And there's still plenty of room for expanded stuff for books and comics and, whatever else there is, shorts, animated shorts and all that. There's still plenty of room for that. But you're getting more of the core story on screen. And I really appreciate that because I think it tells more a fuller story. And just like, the opportunity to be able to tell something longer than like, a trilogy of 2-hour movies, like.
Yeah, and I think that leads really well to the Kenobi series because I think one of the interesting critiques, and hopefully you don't get sucked into the morass of social media, aggression that comes from all the franchises, whether it's Star Trek or Marvel or Star Wars. It gets really weird, as I'm sure you know, and it's frustrating. However, I think that's one of the great things about this Kenobi series. You said it's breaking your heart. Tell me why Kenobi how is it affecting you and why?
Oh my God. Okay. Well, first let me back up. So prequels, like they came out when I was in high school, I had the reaction that most Star Wars fans did, not my favorite. And then I watched the Clone Wars, I watched Rebels, which I think give such new dimension to the prequels for me personally. Like I love the prequels now because I understand, like the Clone Wars series just did a spectacular job of like humanizing these characters in a way that they were a little bit stiff on screen. And so I'm very invested in their stories generally, and then like it's just Ewan as Obi-Wan was always ingenious casting, and like I think him like revisiting the role now, and it's just like the story, it's I wish I know who said it because it's a very good take. I think somebody on Twitter said that like Anakin died on Mustafar and Obi-Wan did too. And now you're seeing kind of the ghost of both of them. And I think that's really like, that's very apt.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. Yeah. Oh yeah. Wow. Like
I know, it gives me chills.
Now that you said that, wow. That strikes, that hits hard. That's what I love about the Obi-Wan character. It's interesting to hear you say what you did about the prequels because I was an original trilogy kid. I saw them when I was 7, 10, and 13 years old. So in the theaters, and so that was I remember I went to the New York City premiere of The Phantom Menace, and walked out of the theater with a large crowd that was quiet. Right? They were like,
which is not what you want.
What did we see? Right? So. But it's interesting too because there's this generation of and a lot of people who listen to my show that was their Star Wars.
Yeah, and I love that. I love it. Like I'm so glad that they've reclaimed it because like us, like cranky old people are like, like I'm so glad they've reclaimed it.
And it's interesting too because I think when you give it a chance, and I think that's what the Kenobi series has the opportunity to do is. Because I watched Rebels and Clone Wars and fell in love for the first time with the prequels. In fact, I was reading something that I wrote and I was like, wow, I was a little bit harsh on the prequels, but that was literally the way I felt. And I think that's growth, right? And I think that's something that social media could use is that ability to say, hey, and it's funny. I readily admit that I walked out of Phantom Menace and was not as excited as I wanted to be. I didn't like it, and now it's changed for me, and I think that's so great. So
I think so. I think I always reserve, and I always say this, like I change my mind a lot when when The Mandalorian was first announced. I was like, okay, it sounds interesting, but I don't think it's for me. And now, like, of course, I love that show like everybody else. So, like, yes, I change my mind a lot, and I think that's healthy and that's good.
It's so funny to hear you say that because if people who listen to my show know, I say that all the time. When I heard about Mandalorian, I was like, I don't think I need that story. And then I heard about Obi-Wan, I was like, I don't think I need that story. Rogue One, I don't think. But you get it, and you're like, oh no, I really needed this story.
Yeah, and usually I will say I don't usually love prequels because I'm like, I've been there. We know how the story ends, but Star Wars has done such a good job, especially in recent years with Rogue One and now with Obi-Wan, with giving us backstory that makes what we know richer. Like Rogue One. The ending of Rogue One makes the beginning of A New Hope so like it gives it so much more significance,
Yeah.
you know. And then same with Obi-Wan. Now it's giving like they're meeting again in A New Hope, like so much more significance, and it's really incredible. I think it's very well done.
Yeah. How do you respond to the fan reaction of, they're retconning, they're changing things? Do you see it as retcon, or do you see it as I mean, I guess you see it as sort of filling in the blanks?
I do feel it as filling in the blanks, but also like, because this happens in Star Wars, Star Trek too, all the time, especially that we're going back and telling like stories set in the at and before like the Kirk era of the Enterprise. And it's just, you know, these need to be living, breathing stories. They need to be stories that we can add to and continue to tell. And to do that, we need some, like, there has to be some creative license. So I think canon is important to a certain extent, but I don't even in the original trilogy, there's stuff that contradicts itself from like movie to movie. And, you know, like it's in the fabric of Star Wars that, you know, it's imperfect storytelling. And I think that's okay. I think, you know, we need to be able to revise and tell new stories. And if that means contradicting, you know, the canon every once in a while, I think I don't have a problem with it personally. And I think it makes for richer storytelling, being able to go back and revisit something that they didn't think was perfectly done, or revisit something that they think, you know, could, like this. If you had asked me, like, I was always excited for the Obi-Wan series because I love Ewan McGregor as Obi-Wan, but I was like, what story do they really have to tell? I never would have predicted that there was this, you know, this blank to fill in that makes that, you know, R2, the message that Leia records for R2, you know, help me, Obi-Wan Kenobi, you're my only hope. It gives it so much more significance.
Yeah.
So, you know, if we don't have the room to kind of fudge a little bit with the details, we're not going to get these rich stories.
I think that's great. And I think it might even go back to what we were talking about at the beginning about why these stories last for 50 years. If you're so committed to, you know, the words on the very first page, then you can't go back to these stories because they can't change. They can't evolve. And they also need to evolve to reflect the times, right? I think a great example is, I was talking to somebody about it the other day, where, you know, back in the 70s and 80s, the Empire and the Rebels was a very simple black and white kind of story to tell, right? You had the good guys, you had the bad guys. And now when you get the sequel trilogy, for example, and even the prequels, but certainly Mandalorian and now the Obi-Wan series, it's interesting to look at, well, are the good guys really as good as we think they are? And are the bad guys really as bad as we think they are? I think that helps move these stories along.
Yeah, I think room for nuance is, you know, I think it's creating room for nuance, and there are good people on, like there are, you know, like I think Andor is going to be a really good example of that. I'm really excited for that series because this is an example of he's working for the rebellion, but he's not what we think of when we think of like the White Knight Rebellion. You know, he's a guy who gets down and does the dirty work that has to be done. And so like I'm really excited to see how they handle that.
Yeah, you know, and I think that was one of the great things about Rogue One was, I think that's why some of the quote unquote old school fans might have a little bit of challenge with these stories because it's been so deeply ingrained to them that, but I mean, the very concept of a rebellion is rule breaking. It's gray area to start, right? So
yeah, absolutely. I think you can still, you can still talk about, you know, good and bad, and with you can those terms are still relevant in the you know, in the current franchise as it exists, but I think there is more nuance there, and I think that's a good thing personally.
Makes for more interesting storytelling for certain. So yeah, with the Kenobi series, and you just answered a question I was going to ask you, but about which series you're looking forward to. I think Andor is going to be
Andor, but I will say this celebration, like I understand, you know, I said before in this very podcast that you shouldn't have to consume every piece of an expanded universe to understand what's going on. But that being said, and I understand that and I stand by that, but I'm still so excited for the Rebels reunion and Ahsoka, and I feel
Oh my gosh.
so guilty for the people who haven't seen Rebels and are like, why is everybody like, but like selfishly, this is exactly what I wanted.
Yeah.
So I'm sorry, and I sympathize with anybody who's frustrated by it, but also like this is like personally what I want out of Star Wars.
Did you happen to see the short clip? Whether you may have seen it,
I did.
Covertly, yes.
I like found some like weird like fan like recording on Twitter that's like half the screen, but I did see it.
To the thought, and it's funny because. And I'll go. We can go into this a little bit as well. Is Rebels is probably the most underrated Star Wars storytelling period, and to see them come. Where do you stand on the? Because some people are like, no, I want my Rebels story to be animated. I want them to come back animated. Obviously, you're pretty excited. You sound pretty excited about seeing them in live action. How does that strike you?
I think like a lot of people have written off the animated series for kids, both of them, Clone Wars and Rebels, and there, sure, there are absolutely elements of them that are very kiddish, but I don't. The story, like, it's Star Wars. I mean, it's appropriate for the same audiences that I think the movies are. There's a lot of darkness there. There's a lot of nuance, and there's a lot of, there's a lot of heavy stuff in Rebels, and I think bringing it to live action is a way to bring that story to a larger audience. I think Star Wars Rebels is not only some of the best serialized storytelling in Star Wars, but like one of the best serialized stories I've ever seen. Like just the way the narrative builds, and like it's just I just think it's so well done, especially the way it like intertwines with Clone Wars.
Yeah,
it's really, and so I'm excited that it might bring that series to a larger, because like even within the Star Wars fan base, a lot of people haven't seen Rebels.
No, it's true. Yeah.
So like I'm hoping more people will watch it, but I also, clearly Dave Filoni has had a plan for this story for a long time, and he's going to tell it. It's almost, I guess the way I feel is kind of like he has made clear he's going to tell the story the way he wants to tell it. And like, we're all kind of just along for the ride. I personally like where the train is going, but I also understand people who are like, oh my God, can we tell like new stories? Does it have to be the like same, like collected back to the Clone Wars, connected to Rebels, now to Mandalorian, now to Ahsoka. Like, I do understand that, but like, it's also, I'm not in charge of the franchise, and it's doing what I want, so I can't really complain that much.
And I think that's an interesting thing, again, back to kind of that point we made at the top about these series, these franchises having such committed and passionate fan bases. They also feel that ownership, right? And I think I think that was the greatest lesson for me with the prequels was, and another great example, and I hesitate to ask because it's such a fire pit sometimes, but Last Jedi to me is a brilliantly written Star Wars story. And I think that people, since they didn't get the Luke Skywalker that they grew up with, they didn't get the I mean, I walked out of Last Jedi, I've said this 1,000 times, but I'll tell you as well, I walked out of it saying it was the best and worst Star Wars movie I'd ever seen. For me, it was, I had written it in my head. I was like, okay, we're going to see the Knights of Ren. We're going to see this. And we saw none of it, of course. And we got a very interesting take on Star Wars. However, at the end of the day, it's just such a well put together story. What are your thoughts on sort of story ownership and Last Jedi?
Yeah, TLJ, I love it. There are things I love about it, and there are things I really don't like about it. I think I feel the same, like similarly to pretty much every Star Wars movie. There are things I absolutely adore about it. I did love it. I did love it leaving the theater, like absolutely just blown away, loved it. And then I think now the discourse around it is just so hard that I just like don't try not to even think about it, like just because like I don't want to engage in that. But like, personally, there are things I really liked about it. There are things I didn't. But as like a diehard Luke fan growing up, it was a hard movie for me, and it's still a hard movie for me to watch personally. That being said, that's not a reason. That doesn't make a movie bad. That just
Right.
makes a movie maybe not for me. And I think that's a distinction a lot of people have trouble with in fandom. Just because it's not what you wanted, and often things are not what I want, doesn't mean it's objectively bad. It just means it's not what I wanted. And it's okay to be disappointed in something because it's not what I wanted, but that doesn't mean it's bad or other people are bad for liking it, or it's, you know what I mean? Like, so it's just, I think that story, and I think that distinction in story ownership, like there are definitely times I'm just like, hey, this looks cool, and I'm glad it exists for the people, you know, who are excited about it, but this is just not for me. You know, I am kind of a person, when I love something, I go deep and I consume all the pieces of it. So like, you know, I've said that multiple times with like Star Trek, for example, with like Lower Decks, which is the animated series. I was like, not for me. Now I love it. I absolutely adore it. It's great. But like, I am fine looking at what there is and just opting out if I don't, you know, I'll give anything a chance, but just being like, you know what, I'm okay with things not being for me, like, because they're for somebody else. And I think that's important. I think the whole point of having multiple things in a franchise means that not every single thing has to be for you. Like, things can be for someone else too. And I feel really strongly about that.
And I think you're right. The phrase I use all the time is that there's so many different doors that you can enter the franchise in. Like I talk about it a lot, in that my entree, of course, was, you know, Star Wars 1977. My daughter, before she saw a single frame of The Force Awakens, was dressing up like Rey. She just fell in love with that character. That was my son is a Clone Wars kid. So his Luke, Leia, and Han are Rex, Cody, and Fives. Like, that's his people. And it's so interesting. But they all have had their surprise moments. They've all had their ways to enjoy it. And it was so great to watch my son, he's an animated kid first for Star Wars, which is so interesting, but to watch him at Celebration and just sort of take all these other pieces in. And my favorite line from my son, who loves to give me a hard time sometimes when I do my podcast, because he's 9 and he's like, he wants to do homework. He's like, oh, you're doing your podcast. When we're coming home from Celebration, he says to me, he goes, Daddy, I'm sorry I ever gave you a hard time about your podcast. Star Wars is awesome. So
that's so nice. That's like, yeah. And it's like similar, like I talked about my toddler. He's still new, but he knows, like, he's still new to it. He's 3.5. So, you know, how much does he really know? But like, he really likes BB-8. He really likes R2-D2, like, you know, just like, you know, the comics and like books that we've, you know, what we've read. You know, he really likes Grogu. And so, you know, I'm really curious to see. And, you know, kids these days are so much luckier than we were. You know, we just watched 3 movies on VHS tape over and over again until we ran out, you know, like wore out the tape.
Right.
But like kids these days, you know, they have like all these options. Like if you go to the Star Wars tabs on Disney Plus, there's so much stuff. Like I have like a lot of the short stuff I haven't even gotten into because I just haven't, you know, like there's just so much content you can't consume it all.
Yeah.
So yeah, like it's a great, like, I don't know, the kids are, I mean, it's must be fantastic to like be a kid these days and grow up like this.
I can't even imagine. Yes. But I liked what you were saying before too, about not everything is for everyone. And I am surprised. So I was, as I said before, I was a Next Generation. I love Deep Space Nine from a Star Trek perspective, but then I fell off for forever. And then I discovered Strange New Worlds. Now, if that brings me back into watching Picard, which it's got to, right? I mean, if I liked Next Generation, I got to watch Picard.
Yeah.
But like, there's these other, and now I'm like, when I'm between episodes, I'm like, what do I check out next? I want to, so that it's working, right, from that perspective.
Exactly. And I think one of the things that the Star Trek franchise generally is doing really well is like every series is aimed at kind of a different viewer a little bit. Like they are very Alex Kurtzman is very he is been very thoughtful at like what is getting greenlit and kind of who the intended audience is for. And of course the hope is you'll watch everything, but like, you know, there's a kids show, and then there's, you know, Discovery, which is kind of the flagship that is you know, it's a more serialized, slightly darker show for like, you know, maybe newer viewers to Trek, whereas like Strange New Worlds is like balances the new and old. Picard is for, you know, Picard is based, like the appeal of Picard is based on nostalgia. Like, like it is something for. I really do feel like that franchise is doing a very good job doing, and like Lower Decks is like, it's animated, so it like brings in a different audience, but the cuts, the like canon cuts are so deep. Like it's just like just the amount of just like in jokes they have in that series. So like it's really good for like longtime fans who've watched like every like, so like yeah, it's fabulous. Like I really think, and then like similar to Star Wars, I think like for the animated kids, there's like the Bad Batch is it's good. Like I watched the full first season, and I will continue to watch it. But like, I think they're really doing a thoughtful job of like what they're putting on screen and like what kind of stuff they're bringing forward, especially since the mixed reception to the sequel trilogy.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's been interesting to watch that connection between it. It's funny because when Disney, I firmly believe that the first line of The Force Awakens, when he says this will begin to set things right, was kind of a meta dig at the prequels, right? Because it was like, we're going to get, however, to watch Ewan McGregor and Hayden Christensen on stage at Celebration, which I was so fortunate to be in the room for, to you can feel that Hayden and I mean, imagine that you are in the new Star Wars movies and you're getting review bombed, you're getting ripped apart. How upsetting is that? And now these guys are to the level of love that, because that next generation is now in there and they're pulling all that together.
And I'm so glad, like I said, like I'm really glad that this new generation came behind and like reclaimed the prequels, because it's like, it's not as much as I love the original trilogy, if you watch it through, showing it to people who had never seen it, or I've seen it with a lot of people who were like watching it for like the first time, and they're all like, oh well, it's fine, but like it's not, I've just heard so much, you know what I mean? Like, so it's not like those movies are fantastic, but they're not perfect. And so like, there's room for imperfection in this stuff. And I'm really glad that there are people who are enthusiastic about the prequels, and I am too. I'm one of them at this point, because I have more context now, and
Yep. And it's, I look at everything as it's expanding this story that I love.
Yeah.
So
yeah, absolutely.
So I do have to ask you though, because you are a science-minded person. Can we talk about midichlorians for a second?
I am so glad we have moved away from that. I don't need a scientist. Force is space magic, and I don't need a scientific explanation for it.
Excellent. And I love that a science first reporter says that. I love it.
No, I don't want it. Force is space magic. I don't need a scientific explanation. Like I don't need necessarily this. If the science in something, like one thing I love about Star Trek is that the science makes sense.
Right.
But it doesn't always have to. Like if I go to a sci-fi movie and the science doesn't make sense, like I'm fine with that. It's a sci-fi. It's fiction. Right. It's fine. Like I'm very good at like just turning my brain off and going with it. But yeah, no, for me, Star Wars especially is space. Like a lot of that is just space magic, and I am fine with that.
Yeah, which is why it's much more fantasy than science fiction in many cases. Yeah. When I was working for Star Wars Galaxy magazine, I was doing a talk at it was a small convention. It was like New Jersey somewhere, and I started my presentation by saying Star Wars is not science fiction, and people literally got up and left because they were like,
it's
"No,
not.
It's
fantasy."
Yeah, 100%.
It's really funny because like I was talking to a couple of friends who were doing like some science of the Marvel universe, bringing another franchise into this.
Sure.
And something like, and I'm also a big fan of the Marvel universe. I've consumed all of that. So she was asking me like, well, okay, so we can explain the science of this and this. Okay, what about Doctor Strange? I'm like, oh no, that's just magic. Just magic. We don't go there.
Right. There's multiversal theories, but no, we're not going to try.
No, we don't talk about like Doctor Strange and his like portals. That's just magic. Like, let's just leave it at that.
How close are we? Since you said Marvel, how close are we to nanotechnology? Like that really funky, cool stuff that just sort of grows on itself like that. I know it's totally unrelated to this conversation.
Yeah,
but
I mean, I hope we're getting close, especially for health applications, like being able to repair stuff inside the body. I really hope we're getting close. I don't think we're quite as close as I would like us to be, but like I would love, you know, with all the caveats of like everything single like science fiction story about nanites and nanotechnology gone wrong. I think it could be a really cool. I think it could be really cool, and I think it could, you know, it could make a huge difference in our quality of lives.
Yeah, no, it's such a fascinating evolution. I've worked in the medical device world, and so just all that constant change is insane, and it's so good. And it's, you know, movies are interesting when things go wrong, but
yes,
that's because they're movies, and so that stuff is really, you know, people who like who panic a little bit about, you know, robotic surgery. No, you want robotic surgery. Trust me, you want robotic surgery.
Yeah.
So, I got distracted there for a second. So I have this section of this segment of my show we call the 10 questions segment. You can give short answers, long answers, whatever you want. There's no wrong answers. I won't judge you, but the internet probably will.
I was like, the internet will judge me though. So okay, I'm ready.
Right,
I'm ready.
Here we go. What is your favorite Star Wars movie, TV show, or book?
Rebels.
Yeah. Top to bottom. Yeah. Is it are you an Ahsoka fan? Or were you?
I am a die-hard Ahsoka fan.
The only shirt I bought for myself at Celebration was my little Ahsoka shirt.
So like I am die hard. Like I screamed when she showed up in Rebels, and it became a different show for me at that point. Like
it was already going down a great storytelling, but when she appeared, it was I agree with that.
It like elevated it.
Yep. So great. Okay, what's your favorite non-Star Wars movie?
That's a good question. Okay, non-Star Wars movie. It would probably be Star Trek 6: The Undiscovered Country, I think, because that's my favorite Star Trek movie. For a lot of reasons, it's my favorite. Not a lot of my love of anything comes from nostalgia. It's the first Star Trek movie I ever watched. So, you know, I would guess I would label that my favorite. A close second would be just the Lord of the Rings trilogy.
Yeah. Lord of the Rings did such a great job of actually bringing that book to life the way I expected to see it. Yes. Those books, rather. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
That, and actually, of all things, Jurassic Park. Like,
I love I am unapologetic. I love every single Jurassic Park / World movie, and okay, a little apologetic because like some of them are really bad, but like I love them.
Yes, I just got my tickets today for Thursday showing. I couldn't be more excited. Big Dumb Loud Fun is what I call it.
Yes, I love Big Dumb Loud Fun. It's like my favorite thing.
That's great. All right, describe Star Wars in 3 words or less.
3 words. Oh God, that's 3 words or less. Okay, it's got to be like space magic lasers.
Okay. All right.
Maybe laser space magic, but lasers space magic laser. No, I think I'll go space magic lasers.
Okay. Hashtag space magic lasers.
Yeah.
There we go. Love that. That's great. All right. What is your favorite Star Wars sound effect?
It's got to be Darth Vader breathing. It's just, I think it's because it's so visceral and so scary. Like you hear that in the dark and you're going to flip out. Like it is, I think it's Darth Vader breathing, probably followed closely by like the Star Trek Red Alert klaxon. I love that. Like not like it's a sound to like listen to on a daily basis, but just like it brings such a scene to my mind. I like things that like make me immediately picture what's going on, and both of those sounds are very visceral to me.
You know what's amazing? I think I've done 157 episodes, and I think you're the first one to say Darth Vader breathing, which is amazing to me because as you said it, I was like, it's so obvious, but
yeah,
wow.
Yeah.
That's really cool.
Like turn off the lights and play that sound and tell me you aren't freaked out of your mind. Like even if you know exactly where it's coming from, like it's just scary.
Yeah. That's why Rogue One worked so well. And that Kenobi episode was so Powerful.
So scary.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
was like freaking out, and I'm so glad. Like, make Darth Vader scary again. Like, I am all for it.
So, what do you? By the time this drops, will be another episode into Kenobi. But as a Star Wars fan, we talked about, there's a certain sort of style. It's been with us for so long. But that Vader that we saw, I'm not a huge comic book fan, but I know that Vader that we saw was comic book Vader, right? That was. How did you respond to it? Was it too much? Was it just right? How did?
Oh, I think it
was
was just right. Like, one of the things I really love is like I think it's Kieran Gillen's. Oh God, I'm blanking on the artist, but Kieran Gillen and the Greg Pak's Darth Vader runs. The comics runs, they're so good, and there's so much anger. You see just like he's so like in a way that you don't really pick up because there's just not enough time for it in the movies. Like, just the level of anger and malice this guy has, and I think really Rogue One and Obi-Wan has brought that to the forefront.
Yeah, somebody said something, and I hadn't thought of it this way, but it's really true. I think, it's always been kind of difficult for me to connect Hayden Christensen to the suit, right? The Anakin that we saw and the Vader that we got in the original trilogy. However, that Vader felt like the blend was really there. I could almost see, and maybe that's because of the Clone Wars. You got a sense for who's in the suit, and it felt it was really
felt real, and you could feel how angry he was, not just like anger, but at Obi-Wan. You could feel like how like just powerful that anger was and how directed it was. It's just,
so good, and only 6 episodes.
Oh my God, no.
We'll make it. Who's your favorite Star Wars droid? There's so many now. They're all good.
I think I have to go with R2. Almost Chopper, but like I think my heart belongs to R2.
Yeah. Of all the collectibles I have, I think I have more R2s than anything. So I'm with you on that one myself. So okay, if you could be any Star Wars character, who would you be?
Be any Star Wars character?
Yes.
Oh man. Ooh, that's a good question. Oh my God, I don't know, because like most of these people, I'm like, I would not want to live like and face like what you face, and like, I don't know. It's a good one. Probably like I would think like fighting like one of the like female X-wing pilots from Rogue One, like fighting for the rebellion, being a pilot flying. I think that would be really cool.
Yes, and your article on StarWars.com about the most underrated pilots.
Yeah, I'm like I like the X-wing pilots. Like I think it's just really cool. Like
yeah, that's a good one. All right, cool. Okay, what is your favorite Star Wars collectible? Being a fan means you probably have at least 1 or 2 or 150 collectibles.
Okay, so my favorite collectible that I own is my Luke Skywalker standee, which is in my basement. Okay, actually it's 2. Luke Skywalker standee, and when the Claudia Gray's Leia the book came out, not I'm blanking on the name of it, not the Princess of Alderaan one, but the one after the I don't know why I'm blanking on the name of it. But there was they did a promotional poster for it, the publisher, that's like has a picture of Leia like on the cover like that, and with her arms crossed, and it's like a vote Leia poster, because the book is about her running for like the new Senate and as a for the New Republic, and so it's a poster, and like I got it, and you can't like buy it anymore, and I framed it and put it in my basement. So that's probably the 2 favorite I own, but the favorite and my my lightsaber
your Obi-Wan saber
is up there. Yeah, I've got it's Saber Forge, so before the days of Galaxy's Edge.
Right.
So those are probably my favorites.
Those are great. Excellent. Okay, if you could own any Star Wars spaceship or vehicle, what would it be?
X-Wing.
Yeah. It is. Yeah. I the thing about the X-Wings too that I always think about is when I was a kid, because I was 7 years old, me and my friends, we used to draw them all the time, and it's just like the all the making of books and things. We just there's something appealing about that design. I almost feel like we really need to make them in real life.
Elegant. It's just very elegant and very
Mhm.
functional, like a perfect mix of form and function.
Yeah. Yes, for sure. Cool. All right. The last question on this 10-question list is, what is your favorite Star Wars moment?
I am a Jedi like my father before me.
Mm.
It makes me like so like emotional. Like it's great writing. It's a great line, great delivery from Mark Hamill, and it's just so and it's one of those lines like I was talking about earlier where knowing what came before and the fill-ins have made it so much more poignant and so much more meaningful, even though it was meaningful the first time I'm sure, I mean, I don't remember the first time I saw it, to be honest, but like, I'm sure it was meaningful the first time I saw it, but like, it has more meaning now even. And so very cool.
Yeah. I hadn't thought of that line since in a while. I mean, but now that you say that and knowing what we know, it's just like, as you were saying, I think a lot of lines from the original trilogy will not be the same again after this Kenobi series. So
yeah.
pretty amazing. So this has been a blast. This has been really a fun conversation. Where can people find you online and keep up with you?
I am on Twitter way too often at skrishna. Also on Instagram at skrishna. I do science videos relatively often on TikTok at Swapna_Krishna. But yeah, I'm pretty available online. So I spend a little too much time on social media like everybody else.
Absolutely. Well, this has been really great. I would love to talk to you again sometime, but this was so much fun. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me. This was excellent.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.
Before I let you go, I want to get you to say, this is Swapna Krishna and you're listening to Around the Galaxy.
This is Swapna I'll look at this is Swapna Krishna and you're listening to Around the Galaxy.
Awesome. That was great. I'm going to just close this down real quick and
Thank you.
Let's see.